welcome to our online AOA session. Because of the weather, that is the reason we're having on AOA, but we still hope that you're able to gain some information and knowledge so that you can carry it with you. Please bow your heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, as we go into our AOA session, we ask that you bless both the young people and the protector as they are able to embark on your word, Father. Our prayers. We'll now have our song service.
I have a song that Jesus gave me. It was sent from heaven above. There never was. I have a song that Jesus gave me. It was sent from heaven above. There never was a sweeter melody. 'Tis a melody of love. In my heart there is a melody. I have a song that Jesus gave me. It was sent from heaven above. There never was a sweeter melody. 'Tis a melody of love. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody of love. I love the Christ that died on Calvary, for he washed my sins away. He put within my heart a melody, and I know it's here to stay. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there rings a melody. There rings a melody of love. 'Twill be my endless theme in glory. With the angels I will sing. 'Twill be a song with glorious harmony. When the gods of heaven reign. In my heart there is a melody. There is a melody with heaven's harmony. In my heart there is a melody. There is a melody of love. In my heart there
this world goodbye. Homeward we then will fly, glory to share. Jesus is coming very soon, morning or night or noon. Many will meet his their doom, trumpets will sound. All of the dead shall rise, righteous meeting in the skies, going where no one dies, heavenward bound. Jesus is coming very soon.
Good evening, everyone. We'll be going our aim, motto, and pledge. The AY aim, the Abba message to all the world in my generation. The motto, the love of Christ compels me. The AY pledge, loving the Lord Jesus, I promise to take an active part in the youth ministry of the church, doing what I can to help this and to finish the work of the gospel in all the world.
Adventist youths are we from every land and sea. Together we pray and work and play in happy harmony. We have our faith to share with others everywhere. A message of love from God above to show the world we care. Adventist youth, Adventist youth, Adventist youth.
Good evening, everyone. It's time for this evening's devotion, and it's entitled Stepping Out in Faith. The scripture reading is taken from Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 9, and it reads, Joshua, son of Nun, was full of spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses. After the death of Moses, God called Joshua to lead the people of Israel into the land of Canaan to claim it as their inheritance. They had the means to do it, and they were certainly motivated. They had been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, eating the same food, wearing the same shoes, and doing the same mundane things every day. They were bored and eager to do something purposeful, to realize their goal of entering Canaan. However, the Israelites had to cross the Jordan at flood stage. The river was overflowing its banks and looked formidable. Furthermore, nothing but obstacles awaited them on the other side. If this venture was to succeed, it would require every bit of faith, every bit of energy, and every bit of determination Joshua and the people could muster. It would tax Joshua in every way possible, and there would be many battles. But it had to be done because it was their calling. What is your calling? What Jordan must you cross to fulfill your purpose? What battles have God called you to fight? Pursuing your calling will require every bit of faith, every bit of energy, and every bit of determination you can muster. And it will take courage. It will tax you in every way possible, but it must be done. If you go forward, depending fully on God, He will provide everything you need to succeed. So don't be afraid. Have courage and take the first step. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. This evening's preacher feature will focus on the Komodo dragon. The Komodo dragon, or Varanus komodoensis, is the largest and heaviest lizard on Earth, generally weighing over 150 pounds, with the largest weighing in at 300 plus pounds and measuring up to 10 feet. It is also believed it has a lifespan of 30 years. It is characterized by a wide, flat head, a rounded snout, both legs, and a huge muscular tail. When it walks, it has a clumsy back and forth walk, and its tongue flicks out of its head constantly. This mammal is found in Indonesia's lesser Sunda Islands, such as Rinja, Padar, Flores, and of course the island of Komodo. It will eat anything it can find, including already dead animals, deer, water buffalo, pigs, smaller Komodo dragons, and occasionally humans, although this is rare. When it hunts, it will rely on camouflage and patience, lying in bushes and waiting until an unsuspecting victim passes by. It will pounce on its prey with powerful legs and sharp claws, then sink its jagged, shark-like teeth in. Occasionally, an animal may escape the jaws of a Komodo dragon, but it will not last long because its saliva contains large amounts of bacteria, which poisons the victim and usually kills it within 24 hours. A dragon will follow the victim it bites for miles, using its keen sense of smell to find it.
Look at this, you guys! Whoa, look at this massive beast. I gotta be really careful. He's thinking twice on how to do this. Look at that. He's actually looking at me as a food item.
They also have good eyesight and can see objects up to 985 feet away. Their huge appetites allow them to eat up to 80% of their body weight in a single meal. A female Komodo dragon can lay up to 30 eggs, which it will guard for several months. Babies are greenish with yellow and black bands, but become solid gray to reddish brown as they age. A young dragon will stay in the trees until it is older to avoid predators, which include larger dragons. It will also roll itself in fecal matter since larger dragons are repulsed by the scent. What spiritual lessons can we learn from the Komodo dragon? The Bible in Revelation 12:9 refers to Satan as a dragon. Just like the Komodo dragon, the devil is powerful and deadly. He can camouflage himself as an angel of the light, so that we are unsuspecting of his attacks. He tries to destroy those who are the victims of his attacks. Satan is deceptive, stealthy, and determined to get his prey. Our only safety is to depend on Jesus, to be obedient and stay clear of the devil's path.
Good evening, everyone. Now, my duty this evening is to introduce our speaker, the one who will present this evening's feature. And this evening, as most of you would have heard, we have Brother Alliston Seale with us. I'm just going to give you some introductory information before he comes on. Now, Brother Seale, he has spent majority of his life, his working life, within the judiciary system. He would have started out as a police officer, where he would have spent about 20 years in the force. He then would have gone on to study law. And after that, he would have moved on to the Department of Public Prosecution, where so far he would have spent about 20 years. And within that time frame, he would have served as an acting magistrate, and among other roles. And about 3 years ago, he would have been appointed to the role of Deputy Director of Public Prosecution. And he would have been called to the inner bar. And so I believe this evening we have someone who is eminently qualified, more than adequately qualified to speak to us on this topic. And he's also married with 2 children and 2 grandchildren, which he's very proud of. and he's also a member of one of our sister churches, Ebenezer. And so not only is he qualified in terms of academics, but he's also a devout Seventh-day Adventist, and he loves God as well. So I invite you this evening, those who are on Zoom with us and those who are online on YouTube, to listen carefully. And if you have any questions, feel free to log on to our Zoom link and to be involved in this discussion this evening, which I believe will be very interesting and informative. So at this time, without any further ado, I will hand you over to Brother Seale as we continue this program and move on into our main feature.
Yes, good evening, brothers and sisters. I have been asked to give a short discourse with you relating to the topic, our rights as Adventists. I'm hoping that for the next 45 minutes or so, that we will have a discourse. And I say a discourse simply because I don't propose to sit and lecture to you for the next 45 minutes. I'm hoping that during the session, that anyone who wants to query something and ask a question can do so. And we will have an interactive discussion for more than a sit-down lecture. This issue about our rights as Adventists is a topic that most people are concerned about, because most people in the world are concerned about their rights. And you hear a lot of people talk about, this is my right, and I'm exercising my right. Now we as Adventists have the same rights basically as every other person who lives in Barbados, and I speak specifically to Barbados because we as a people are governed by our constitution. And you may hear people talk about my constitutional right. Sometimes they are loosely speaking of the constitutional right, because when one speaks about one's right, especially one's constitutional right, one must have an understanding of what they speak. And the first thing one will want to understand and one will want to know is, what is a right? And loosely defined, a right is a moral or a legal entitlement. It is something that I have a right to then, I am entitled to have this thing. And in the context I speak about legal rights, moral rights. There are other rights, but we are not dealing specifically with those now. We are speaking primarily about our legal entitlement. This legal entitlement comes under, as I expressed before, the Constitution of Barbados. Now, the Constitution of Barbados, as we would appreciate, was the document that came about in 1966, so to speak, when we became independent. because we existed under the English law before. We were subject to Queen in that sense, and England made the laws for us more or less. We were not independent. So things that happen in England affect us directly. Strange enough, England does not have a written constitution. It has a constitution, but it does not have a written constitution. Their laws, their norms, and the things that they do, which we would call constitutionally do, these things evolve from practice, but they never really had a written constitution. However, we do have a constitution, and some persons have argued with the move from under British monarchy to what we have now, a republican type of governance, that we don't have a constitution. Some have argued that. I'm not a proponent of that. I don't believe in that, but although we have not yet written the Republican Constitution, and the Constitutional Review Commission, that commission is still taking information from the citizens because they want it to become a document that all the citizens had an opportunity to give a voice. We still exist in a constitutional republic, and the old constitution is still relevant, in my opinion. But that's only my opinion, because as we are dealing with law, various lawyers have various attitudes, varying opinions, and that happens in any free society. You have an opportunity to have an opinion. That is what democracy is all about. Once there's democracy, you have an opinion. You have an opinion to agree or disagree. We know that in some societies, it is difficult to disagree, or there are serious ramifications for disagreeing, especially with the government of the day. But in democracies, you're allowed to criticize the government if you choose to, and do certain things to oppose the government. But certainly, you have to do it in peace and in order. So we speak to this document called the Constitution. In Barbados, and in most territories that have a constitution, it is regarded as the supreme law. And at section 1 of the Constitution, it makes that declaration. It makes that declaration in that it says, this Constitution is the supreme law of Barbados, and subject to the provisions of this Constitution. If any other law is inconsistent with this Constitution shall prevail, and the other law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. Now that's a mouthful, but if you read it carefully, you understand what it is saying. It is saying, look, this is our Constitution. I am the supreme law of this territory. I am subject only to the provisions of this Constitution, because it says subject to the provisions of the Constitution. So the Constitution is only subjected to itself. It is not subject to any other law. It is subject to itself. So it has in itself certain checks and balances that ensures that the Constitution does what it is expected to do. So the only checks and the only balances for the Constitution is the Constitution itself. And it says, if any other law is inconsistent with this Constitution shall prevail, and the other law to the extent of the inconsistency be void. And what that really means is that sometimes there's passage of legislation. You might have an entire act passed, and certain parts of that act seem to be inconsistent with the Constitution. Inconsistent with the Constitution because the Constitution lays out certain rights and obligations, fundamental freedoms, and certain things of that nature. If then a piece of legislation says, look, you can do X, Y, or Z. Let's say, for example, you had a piece of legislation that was written for anybody, let's say even the police. And the police, by this legislation, were able to breach the rights of a citizen inconsistent with the Constitution. Then the whole act may still be valid, but that part of the act, that part of the legislation, which is inconsistent with the Constitution, would be deemed void. And the act would still be good, albeit to that particular part of the legislation. And that's what the Supreme Law Clause is about. You may hear about the Supreme Law Clause. It's that declaration by the Constitution that says, I am supreme, and anything that is inconsistent with me is void. It is a small version of God, but it's certainly not God, because God controls everything. But I am the Lord thy God, and you shall have no other God but me. That is how God declares himself. And for governance of a society, basically that is how the Constitution declares itself. The only thing is that the Constitution takes its power from the people, while God certainly does not. The Constitution exists because people put it there. And notwithstanding, there are rights that evolve and emanate from the Constitution, the people still have a right and this overarching power, if they so desire, to change the Constitution. The Constitution has a number of what they call entrenched provisions. And these entrenched provisions are captured under the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual. And these rights are the same rights given to every citizen and every Adventist. So you have no less rights than anybody else. And chapter 3 of the Constitution speaks about the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual. That chapter identifies the rights of citizens. It speaks of these fundamental rights and freedoms from about section 12 through to section 23 of the Constitution. And it says something at section 11 that's very important. Why I say it is very important is because most people recklessly, I say, and loosely speak about my constitutional rights. So when they seek to do what they want to do, or say what they want to say, or even sometimes behave how they want to behave, they rely on these fundamental rights and say, my constitutional right. Now, just for me to go back a bit to talk about how these fundamental rights are enshrined. You talk about, sometimes you hear something is enshrined in the Constitution, and then you would hear something about an entrenched provision. Now, these fundamental rights and freedoms are entrenched provisions. Entrenched provisions simply mean that they are entrenched in the law, in the Constitution. They are so important that they cannot be easily changed, and that's why they're called entrenched provisions. And normally, anybody that understands how laws are passed may recognize that laws are passed simply by going to the lower house, reading on the floor a number of times, and if it is successful, and it's taken to a vote, and that vote is usually regarded as a simple majority. These are ordinary laws. A simple majority. Once a simple majority passes or votes in favor of the piece of legislation, it is passed. It then goes to the upper house, which is regarded as the Senate. And the same thing happens up there. And after it passes there, it then becomes law. All it requires is the assent by the president. One time it would have been the governor general, but the president. And then it becomes law. Now, these entrenched provisions, and there are other laws that require, that have this nature, that requires this type of voting. Money bills, when you're voting for money, money bills also require this 2/3 majority. This is not then this is where we talk about entrenched provision. Rather than a simple majority to affect these fundamental rights and freedoms, if anyone wanted to change it, any government wanted to change it, government would then require a 2/3 majority. And that is why persons were probably so alarmed and so afraid when this last government won all the seats. Because they felt, and it really could happen, but we've got matured governments in Barbados, and although people have opposing views when they support whatever party, and that's their right, but we've got matured governments, and you don't usually get governments of a despotic kind that as they get into power and because they have the 2/3 majority, that they go while making legislation as they like and affecting the fundamental rights and freedoms of the citizens. But the fear that came over the 30 Love, strange enough, could have been the same fear that came over the 2010. Because if a government had 20 seats of the 30, that government would still have a 2/3 majority. And the only thing that could save them is if one of their own members voted against or abstained or something that would prevent them from getting the 2/3 majority. But 20-10 has basically the same effect as 30 Love. The only thing about 30 Love, as I said, you have less chance of a defector, so to speak. But those provisions are like that. So if anybody wants to change these provisions that I spoke about under Chapter 3, from Section 12 to Section 23, then you would have to have a 2/3 majority of the House, in both houses, in fact, not even one, in both houses. That means the upper and lower house, House of Assembly and the Senate, voting against, voting for the bill to change the Constitution. And that is why we could move to a Republican status anyway, because certainly the government of the day has the majority, in fact, has a absolute majority. But when we hear people loosely speak about their fundamental rights and their constitutional right, they must speak these words against a background of understanding the Constitution and understanding what it stands for. Because at section 11 of the Constitution, it being the first section under the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual at chapter 3, it says this. It says, whereas every person in Barbados is entitled to the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, that is to say, the right, whatever his race, place of origin, political opinions, color, creed, or sex, but subject to the respect for the rights and freedoms of others and for the public interest, to each and all of the following, namely, and it goes on to tell you something. I'll get to that a little later. But I'm just giving you an understanding of section 11, which tells you, in short, everybody in Barbados is entitled to these fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual. Don't care about your class, color, creed, whatever, but subject to respect for the rights and freedoms of others. So your constitutional right does not give you the power to do as you like. It is not an absolute right. It is subject to the rights of others and public interests. So, for example, you can't say what you like because they're the rights of others that exist. So you cannot say, I am exercising my constitutional right to say what I like about who I like. Because to do that, to say what you like about whomsoever you like, you'll find yourself probably before somebody's court. Because there's still the law that deals with defamation. One time it would be regarded as slander to speak words against another person that defames their character. But, or if you wrote something in the paper, it would be libelous. But our law has encapsulated both together, so we don't really speak about slander and libel no more. We speak plainly to defamation, to defame somebody. So whether written or spoken, it would be defamation. So you can't say what you like. So it goes on to tell you about these rights that you're entitled to, namely life, liberty, security of the person, protection for the privacy of his home and other property, and from deprivation of property without compensation, but the protection of the law and freedom of conscience, of expression, and of assembly and association. Now, these are small subheadings encapsulated under section 11, but between 12 and 23 of the Constitution expounds on them, explores them more in depth. Because 12 talks about life. 11 tells you A, B, and C, and D. It quickly tells you about life, liberty, security of the person. But it then, from 12 onward, speaks about these things in a more substantial way. 12 says life. No person shall be deprived of his life intentionally, save in the execution of a sentence of the court in respect of a criminal offense under the laws of Barbados, which he has been convicted. Now, you see here now that we still can't speak about absolute rights, and the rights are conditional, because you have the right to life, but save an exception of a sentence of the court. In respect of a criminal offense, under the laws of Barbados for which he had been convicted. So you can still be convicted of a criminal offense and be sentenced to death. There have been arguments about it recently. There have been a shift and a shaping in terms of that. But there's still the possibility of a death sentence. We had recently an amendment to the Offences Against the Persons Act. And that Offences Against the Person Act had offenses obviously like murder. And it used to say that a person who was guilty of murder shall suffer death. So it was absolute. Once you were guilty of murder, you suffered death. Now, many persons argued against this, and this went up to the International Court on Human Rights. And there were many arguments at the CCJ, Caribbean Court of Justice. Before that was formed, there were arguments before the Privy Council, which spoke about this being cruel and inhumane punishment. Because strange enough, the same constitution that says we can execute you by an order of the court, having been convicted for a criminal offense, the same constitutional said, no, but a citizen should not be subject to cruel and inhuman punishment. So the crafty lawyers, as they were, said, well, look, hey, if my client is sentenced to death, especially in the traditional way that we do it in Barbados, sentencing an individual to the gallows, which is death by hanging, then that must be cruel and inhuman punishment. And this was argued back and forth for years. Obviously, that being the argument, many courts, especially in civilized society, because as we get more civilized, so to speak, people abhor these types of things. Death penalty. And for that reason, many international organizations, Amnesty International, etc., have been against this death penalty issue and capital punishment. They've always felt that you could use other punishments, and this was kind of barbaric to embark on this type of punishment. So there was a shift in, and as a result, the Privy Council deemed something first. They made the first step. They didn't say it was unconstitutional, but they said after 5 years on death row, it would be cruel and inhumane to execute an individual. So in short, you had to do it before 5 years. Although the appellate process could last longer than 5 years. In fact, the trial process and appellate process could last longer than 5 years, which would effectively put everybody who has been sentenced to death in a cruel and inhumane state. So it bound the judiciary and binded government by the way it was done. You could not do it because you found yourself, you couldn't rush to execute people because they had certain processes that they had to exhaust. So you couldn't rush and do it in a hurry. But while waiting, the time elapsed. So you couldn't do it then because you were bound the time having passed. So it was a no-win situation, although they did not say the death penalty was unlawful. But the other human rights tribunals said it, in short. But in Barbados, we still have it, but death penalty now is restricted for what we call the worst of the worst. Treason still has the death penalty, and capital murder now is a special category. One time they only had murder, and that was it. There's no capital murder and non-capital murder. One is just the ordinary killing. The other is the killing in certain circumstances, killing a judge, killing a witness, killing a police officer in the execution of his duty to prevent it, killing a number of persons, killing a person in the most heinous way. All they're categories, but basically now you can have a non-capital murder and a capital murder. Capital murder still carries a death penalty, whilst the non-capital murder does not. A person was sentenced to a term of years imprisonment. So even this life thing that persons believe they have a right to, your life can be taken lawfully taken in certain circumstances. You also have at 13 your personal freedom, personal liberty. No person shall be deprived of his personal liberty save as may be authorized by law in the following cases, that is to say. And again, you see it, there are no absolute rights. There are none. They're conditional upon many other things. So you have the right to personal liberty. You can walk around as you like. Nobody can stop you just from walking around freely, but there are things that impact on that. So for example, it says, in consequence of his unfitness to plead to a criminal charge, or in the execution of a sentence or order of the court, whether established in Barbados or by some other country in respect of a criminal offense, which he has been convicted. So when you're convicted of a criminal offense, you don't have liberty anymore. You can't walk around as you like. And even if you can't plead to a charge because maybe of some mental incapacity, then you still can't walk around as you like because you've committed an offense. You can't plead to the charge. We can't sentence you because you can't plead, but we have to place you somewhere. So then in those cases, more often than not, you're placed at the psychiatric hospital. So that is where your freedom is taken away. So somebody in those circumstances can be picked up and taken to the psychiatric hospital once the procedures are followed. And there are a number of other things that can prevent your liberty. Suspicion of committing a crime. Police officers suspect you committing a crime, can arrest you, and that restricts your liberty. They can do if it is suspicion, and if you actually committed a crime, they will arrest and charge you. There are a number of other things under that section 13, but I don't propose to spend all evening on those issues. I just propose to go through these rights and freedoms as quickly as possible. So then at 14, it speaks about no person should be held in slavery or servitude or forced labor. So again, that is a liberty issue similar to the one up front, which permitted you to walk around subject to being arrested and all that. But it also focuses primarily on forced labor. It gives that a special section for itself, because I guess coming out of the background that we as African descendants came out of, we would certainly have to make it emphatically clear that the concept of slavery will not be tolerated. And that finds itself as part of the Constitution. Section 15 says no person should be subject to torture or inhumane or degrading punishment or other treatment. I can go past that because we touched on that briefly as a corollary to the death penalty that you can have. Because notwithstanding you can have the death penalty, as I said, persons have argued that is cruel and degrading punishment. So that's on the other side of it. That's the other side of the coin, and that's where the arguments are made. That notwithstanding a court can sentence an individual to death, hey, it is cruel and inhumane punishment. Hence, it shouldn't be done. So we go past that. 16 says, no person of any description should be compelled. No property. Now this is deprivation of property without compensation. No person should be deprived of his property. And it says no property of any description shall be compulsory taken possession of, and no interest in or right over property of any description shall be compulsory acquired, except by or under the authority of written law. See, government always makes sure it saves itself, because although we talk about deprivation of property without compensation, government makes sure that they say, look, you still can't keep that land as you like because we may need it for some greater purpose. So we can take it away from you. We can compulsory acquire it. By law, there must be some written law, and they will write law, and they have law that allows for compulsory acquisition. And when this compulsory acquisition occurs, but it still says that not without compensation. So even though the law can take away my land, I must be compensated for it. So you can't deprive me of my property without compensation. The question always is, how much compensation? And persons have argued about that. Some people have sought to say that their land was valued more than government paid them. And after you've got a sticking point as the price, government will still take the property from you, and they will give you what they believe is a fair price. If you want to take it to court, you can. I guess a court can determine whether or not it was a reasonable price in the circumstances. But generally speaking, you cannot be deprived of your property without compensation. All of these are rights. 17, a protection against arbitrary search. And that is the reason why policemen who go out there are required to have a search warrant, because you can't just come into a man's property and search as you like. The individual is protected against search too, notwithstanding there are circumstances where he may be searched. Because if an individual is arrested, he is usually searched, and he can be searched without his permission, because first of all, he's a prisoner now, having been arrested, and there are protocols to protect the individual who have arrested him. There are protocols to protect him himself, because the reason for search of an individual who has been arrested is basically to protect the person who have arrested him, protect the person who has been arrested, protect property from being damaged, and maybe to provide information for the offense itself on which he has been arrested, or maybe some other offense. So he can be searched, and so without his permission. Additionally, persons in custody can be searched. I mean, in custody meaning arrested and convicted in prison. Because when the prison wishes to do its random searches, it would search anybody. The officers, they can search anybody. All the people in the cells can come out, and they're made to strip. Sometimes they're made to squat, because the prison has to safeguard its own security. So from time to time, they would be searched. And they can bring constitutional motions. They can bring suits against the state, suggesting that they were illegally searched, because that provides for that type of search. But ordinarily speaking, you can't just walk down the road without reasonable suspicion and call an individual police or not and say, come here, I want to search you. That would be unlawful. It would be illegal. And the individual would have redress in the court, or can have redress in the court. So that is important. And 18 now talks about, if any person is charged with a criminal offense, then unless the charge is withdrawn, the case shall be afforded fair hearing within a reasonable time by an independent and impartial court established by law. And that is something that lawyers have been arguing about recently. Recently, even arrested persons have been fortunate enough to get money from government, because they have been arrested, charged, and the matter have been looming for many years. And they are arguing that it is in breach of Section 18 because they were not afforded a fair hearing within a reasonable time. There have been arguments on both sides. But the law is the law, And notwithstanding, persons may argue that an individual shall not benefit from his own criminality. The lawyers will not argue that. First of all, lawyers will argue the question of criminality has to be determined by the courts. And if the individual does not have a hearing within a reasonable time, you can't call him a criminal because the matter have not been resolved by the courts. And that is the reason that they rely on Section 18 of the Constitution. Again, as I said, because it is an entrenched provision, anytime it conflicts with any other law, that will be the law, and the other law will be inconsistent. So you can't argue that this other law tells you this and this other law tells you that, because nothing conflicts with the Constitution and can stand against the Constitution. Now, Section 19, protection of freedom of conscience, is very important for us as Christians. Although all the other law allows protections, this one is most important to us. By the way, I'm still, if there are any questions, you can put up your hand. I guess I hope that there's a moderator who will see it, because I'm just talking. I won't be looking to see that part. Any questions or whatever, then you can alert me. But Section 19 is very important in that it says, except with his own consent, no person shall be hindered in the enjoyment of his freedom of conscience. Now, this thing called freedom of conscience is very important to us. And for the purpose of this section, the said freedom includes freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom to change his religion, which is important, that you can change your religion or belief. No one can force you in a religion. And freedom either alone or in community with others, and both in public and in private, to manifest and propagate his religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. Now, this is the old Constitution. I can't say what the new Constitution will be, and I'm just hoping that this section remains, or a section with similar provisions, or sections that give one greater freedom of religion. Because this section not only allows me to have whatever religion I want, it allows me to change it. It allows me to manifest it and propagate it. Now, remember, if I can have a religious right, but there may be restrictions on how I manifest it. There may be restrictions certainly on propagating it. Because we're into missions now, and if we were to get legislation that restricts the propagation, then that is where trouble starts. Because notwithstanding you have the religion, you can't spread it. You have to keep it to yourself. Persons can inquire, but you cannot go out there to say you're winning souls and sowing seeds, because that would be an infringement on the Constitution if the Constitution didn't include that. But as it presently stands, it is good for you, because we as a people can have our religious freedom, and we can change it if we want to. That's why sometimes members come, they spend a while, and then some leave. They have that right. We go out to them and see if we can bring them back, yes, because we can propagate. But that could not happen if the Constitution wasn't written as it is. You may have religious rights, But your rights would be individual rights and personal rights that you have to keep to yourself. But this constitution, as it was, seems to be telling us that we certainly can propagate those rights. Now, a lot of people have looked at the Constitution and believe, certain religious things had no right in the Constitution. And, as we become, a world with less Christ in it, you can see erosion of these things. Persons have argued that secular religious rights had no room in a secular world. And that is where issues will evolve, and that is where we need to be careful. Sometimes we need to speak out, because sometimes we as Christians believe we had no right in the secular world either. And we seem to close our eyes about things that are going on up there. And you don't want to know. And you can't even listen to the news. And the radio gone banja. But while listening to the things out there, you are able to understand where and how the world is moving. And all of the fear that persons have might not be well suited, might not be well taken, might be just fear mongering. On the other hand, when certain things start to move in a particular direction, the fears may be well founded. But if we're not observant, and we don't see how the secular world works and don't understand it and observe it and keep a careful eye on it, and wherever possible, make our presence felt in it, then we could suffer. Because when town hall meetings are going on with the Constitution and the changing of the Constitution, the question is, where are we? If we then remain silent and the Constitution is written that excludes us or that erodes some of our rights, how then do we complain? Or why then do we complain? Because when we had an opportunity to speak, we didn't, because we felt it wasn't our business. But all of these things are inextricably bound up in each other. So we can't be so sanctified that we do not care about what is going on out there, when what is going on out there could affect us adversely. And that is where the problem comes. So it is important to understand this section 19. Now this section 19 has problems for us and even the world as it is now. Because with the issues of LGBTQ and all of these other factions, the question is, how do they affect your rights? If you say you're a Christian and you don't propose to do certain things, you have seen it in the first world, where the baker refused to bake a cake for 2 men and was sued. There were people with bed and breakfast who refused to let homosexual couples stay in their place. And they were sued because discrimination and discriminatory laws are prohibited. The question is, how do you treat them as opposed to your own religious conviction and the rights that you have under the Constitution? Should your rights be eroded? And remember, the Constitution is the supreme law. But within the new Constitution, and even within this Constitution, it still protects against discrimination. So you have to balance the two. Your religious rights against these other individual rights. Protection from discrimination against protection of freedom of conscience. Having your own right to have your own religion, and your own religion may say that certain conduct is prohibited. How do you reconcile the two? So that is a very, very important section. and we need to keep it at the forefront of our minds. Just to go on quickly, because I'm soon coming to an end. Section 20 speaks about freedom of expression. That's to hold your opinion. Again, I said that is the one that I say you can't say what you like about who you like and how you like, because you will run afoul of the law as it relates to as I said before, they say I'm liable, because you can't speak what you like against who you like, and that is an offense. Sometimes it could even be a criminal offense, because there's criminal defamation. But generally speaking, it's a civil offense, and a man can be sued for what he says, because he defames an individual. So we still, notwithstanding Section 20 that affords us freedom of expression, we can still run afoul of the law. 21, protection of freedom from assembly and association. Now, one is allowed to assemble next with who he likes, but we know there are conditions to that. If you want to march, you can't just get a crowd of people and march through town, because there are laws that determine that you can't do that. There's public order legislation that prevents certain assemblies, and that is why you may need permission from the Commissioner of Police to assemble, permission from the Commissioner of Police to hold a march or a rally. It may not be anti-government, it may be just a normal rally, but you have to seek permission. So your assembly don't give you this carte blanche situation where you can just decide, okay, we're going to assemble as we like. Fortunately, churches, because of the propagation of the gospel, have some degree of exemption, and they might be able to hold open air meetings and all that, sometimes without permission from the police. But certainly it has restrictions, because still remember, your enjoyment of your religion can still affect a man who won't hear the name of God. There are many of those. So when you're at the corner blasting from your speakers, and he wants to watch whatever he wants to watch and is affected by it, he has the right to say no. And that is why it is always good to canvass the area before, so that you can at least get some degree of tolerance from the persons involved, so that you can keep your meeting uninterrupted, because you cannot interrupt persons by your own propagation of the gospel. Then there's protection of movement. You should be able to move into any part of Barbados. The bunch is to restrict your movement, and again, that is conditional, because as you will realize, public health issues can affect that also. Arrest can affect that. Because if, for example, there's a person who lands in Barbados and there's some public health disease or public health scare, the movement can be restricted. As you notice, we would remember, it should be fresh in our minds, the COVID epidemic that but I can't even say they had, that we have. We're still coping with it. It's just that as time passed, human beings cope better over time, because all the hysteria and the scaring is gone, and they faced the reality that yes, it has taken many lives, but we are still here, and since we are still here, we have to live with it. But even that, in and of itself, there are certain restrictions, and one could not move about as they like. They had times that you had to stay in your house. You couldn't even go out of the house, although it was your own property. You couldn't be seen on the street. These are things that prohibit and restrict movement. 23 speaks about protection from discrimination on the grounds of race, etc. And that is the section that I spoke about, where you have one section allowing that and another section allowing protecting from discrimination. Now the question is, remember, you're talking about all of the Constitution. So the Constitution against the Constitution. So you can't even say that it is inconsistent with the Constitution and therefore it is null and void. Because remember, Section 11 told you that once there's another law inconsistent with the Constitution, that law will be void. But this is the Constitution protecting against discrimination, and the same Constitution that allows you to propagate the gospel and have your rights. The question is, how do you treat the one against the other? How do you deal with people who want you to compromise your religious values to protect them from discrimination? How does the court do the balancing act? That is going to be very important when organizations like the LGBTQ and other organizations start to really flex their muscle. I mean, we've heard them speak a lot in recent times, but still not to the extent that they have really adversely affected many people. So it is still in the, I should say, in the background, but I don't think it will go away. It will only get larger. And the question is, how will we treat to it when it happens? Because there are two rights fighting and competing for interest. Who is the right to right, for want of a better terminology? All to protected under the fundamental rights and freedoms. Protection from discrimination. Are you discriminating against me because you're not letting me do this? Are you as a pastor discriminating against me because you don't want to marry me? You don't want to marry me to my man. You don't want to marry me to my woman. Isn't that discrimination? But how does that fly against my religious right that I am saying that I am not going to do that because my religious rights are protected under the said Constitution? That's the
Excuse me, sir?
that will play out certainly.
You were late
I
for
believe
pickup.
sooner.
Oh, I'm sorry, there was no parking
But
spots.
we will have to all deal with it when the time comes. And that is the reason why I say that when there are issues like town hall meetings that involve the Constitution and the shaping and reshaping of the Constitution, persons should be more interested in it than they think they need be, because some people believe that this is some elaborate document outside my purview, which I have no interest in at all. But I need to be interested in it, because it affects me directly and adversely. I will just finish out one part now. When we speak about our rights as Adventists and employment, I will just quickly speak about that, because some people might again believe that, all right, my rights are protected under the Constitution. And although my rights are protected under the Constitution and nobody can make me work on the Sabbath, nobody can do this and nobody can do that. But I want us to remember that the issue is employment law. And although I've just told you that any other law that's inconsistent with the Constitution is void, employment law is not really an issue of law against the Constitution. Employment law is contract law. And contract law, you have an employer, you have an employee, and the employer contracts the employee either as, looking at a contract for service or a contract of service. And basically, it's a subtle difference between, well, not subtle, it's a vast difference. It might sound like a subtle word, just changing the word of for, replacing it with for. But a contract of service is really an employer-employee type of relationship where I'm employed by you. A contract for service is different. I am an independent contractor and I come to work for you, but I set my times, I set my hours. Sometimes I bring my own tools. All these things, they're different. You don't pay national insurance for me. I pay my own way because I run my own company, so to speak. The difference here, first of all, is a contract for service might allow a certain degree of flexibility in that the person who is employed, because he's an independent contractor, could tell you, look, I am a mason, for example, could tell you, look, I can build your house, but I ain't gonna come on Sabbath. I can come on Sunday and continue. I can work from Monday I can work from Sunday to Friday. And I leave it early Friday too. I'm not gonna be mixing concrete all 7 o'clock trying to get it finished off. Now that is possible because he sets the terms and conditions of his employment, because he's an independent contractor. But what to say about a contract of service where you're an employee? Remember, it's still a contract. So there has to be an offer and an acceptance, which is the fundamentals of contract law. Offer, acceptance, those are the things that you look in. One party has the offer, one party has the accept. The terms must be on the same terms. There must be what they say, a meeting of the minds. And in law, we say a consensus ad idem. There must be two meetings of the minds agreeing on the same terms of the contract. So when I agree to come and work for you, and you tell me I go to work on the Sabbath, then you either agree or disagree, and that is up to the individual because it's a contract. But if I agree to work, then you can't complain that the man has breached your religious rights because you have contracted into it. Then there are certain emergency services jobs, as I was one before, police officer, that has to perform duties. Nurses, doctors have to perform duties. The question is, is the job that you perform required exceptionally? It is one that will require you to perform that duty. And the question is, are you breaking the Sabbath or not? Those are decisions that I think sometimes consciously an individual will have to make between himself and God. But you have to look at it and determine how it works. If it is absolutely essential that you perform that job on that day. But if you enter into a contract, then you can't claim that, you've been made to work. It is a little different when that was a term and condition of your employment that you'll be off on Saturdays. And then all of a sudden, someone comes up with this thing and wants you to work on Saturday. That's a whole different ball game. That then would be a change in the terms and conditions of the contract, and that would be a breach. Because having entered into the contract, recognizing that you work Monday to Friday, weekends off, and then all of a sudden they want you to work without your consent. Because people may be able to go in for overtime, people may want to work and all these sort of things. But if someone then seeks to compel you that you got to be here on Saturday, then that would be a fundamental change in your contractual obligation. And that employment contract then would have been breached by the employer. That is certainly something that you will have a right under the law to challenge. But other than that, if you enter into the contract and you accept the work, then, and every contract does not have to be a written contract. There may be terms and conditions in the contract that just happen by conduct. There might be an acceptance that is just by conduct. There might not be an acceptance that requires any elaborate written agreement. But you will have to determine that. But you can't jump up and say automatically that to work for somebody to make you work on the Sabbath is really a breach of your constitutional right. You will have to determine how you entered into the contract, why you entered into the contract, what are the parameters of the employment contract that you entered into. And if you entered into the employment contract that afforded the employer to change the terms and conditions, or that was always part of it, that you would be called upon to work on Saturdays if required or something like that, that makes it an open-ended one. The question is he really in breach then when he calls upon you? But if you already have the terms and conditions, and the terms and conditions preclude Saturdays, that for sure you're not working, then any unilateral change by the employer would obviously be a breach of that contract. So,
question.
Yes, please.
What happens if you were not Adventist before, so you're entering contract with no problems, but then you became Adventist? What rights do you have then after you become Adventist and you're already in a job?
Right. Now that's where the problem lies. Remember, you entered into the contract, a contract of employment with certain terms and conditions which you agreed to. Having now changed your religion, you are now breaching the contract. You are now changing the terms and conditions. So you would have to be, you're renegotiating the contract. So the only thing you can do then is at the behest of the employer. If the employer is kind enough to give you the Sabbath off, especially if it is a business that works Sundays or something like that, he can switch your days or something, but he does not have to, because it is no breach. You entered, just like how he could not unilaterally change the terms and conditions of the contract by making you work on Saturday if that was not in it. You, notwithstanding that you have changed your religion or have been converted to the Seventh-day Adventist, you can't come and tell the man, no, I am an Adventist and I will not work. You would have to renegotiate and hope that he does. Because remember, the law is a balanced thing. You try to be fair on both sides. Just as he can't come and tell you, well, I know I tell you that we don't work on Saturdays, but certain things has changed which caused me to want you to work on Saturdays. And you would say, no. You can't breach the terms and conditions. You then can't do it the other way and say, regardless of how good-natured it was, regardless of how important it is for your newfound religion, regardless of how you believe in the Seventh-day Adventist message, that's good. That's excellent. But when you look at it fairly, which a court will be, because a court will not be looking at, oh, he has been converted, and just as a million angels in heaven sing at one convert, they ain't going to sing in court, unfortunately. But the court is simply going to be saying, well, what is fair? Can you change the terms and conditions of the contract? So you will be, in a precarious position, which unless the employer renegotiates the contract, then you will have to make a decision whether you will give it the job or not. Yes, please. Now, just to finish it off, these rights, as I said, are so important that Section 24 now encapsulates all and tell you how do you enforce or protect these rights. And Section 24 tells you, look, subject to the provisions of Section 6, if any person alleges that any provisions of 12 to 23, these are 12 to 23 being these entrenched provisions and the fundamental rights and freedoms, if any has been breached, is being breached, or is likely to be contravened in relation to him, then without prejudice to any action, the person may apply to the High Court for redress. Now this is one of the, it just shows you how important the Constitution is and your fundamental rights and freedoms are. It shows you that they're so important because remember, there's no other law that really anticipates or contemplates something will happen in the future just like that. Normally, some wrong would have to be done now. But the Constitution says any of these provisions has been, that means it's already gone, that's past tense, is being, which means it is now being breached, or even is likely to be breached. You cannot go to a court or a police station and say, that man down there is likely to hit me, because the police will take no action. What do you mean likely to hit me? He either has to threaten to hit you, he either has to actually hit you, or in the process of hitting you. You can't say he's likely to do this. That man there is likely to steal my money. Will the police arrest him? Certainly not. Because if you have a whole wad of money next to a person, anybody around it is likely to steal it. But that don't mean an offense has been committed. But the Constitution is so important and your fundamental rights and freedoms are so important that even if there's a likelihood that they will be breached, you can bring an action in the High Court. Obviously, it can't be fanciful. It must be something that has an evidential base, something that shows, yes, we have some degree of evidence that suggests to us that it will be breached. So once that is done, therefore, then an individual can go before the High Court for redress. And that basically is in a nutshell, or the smallest shell I can put it, because I've been here for over an hour. I didn't even realize that. That is how our fundamental rights and freedoms are loosely protected under the Constitution of Barbados. And as I said before, Adventists are no different to any other persons who have rights and freedoms. I'm seeing a question here. Question, please. If a business requires a person to work shift according to the Shop Act, then the business has the authority to say they don't want the employee to have Saturdays off only. Or is this discrimination? Wait, let me get this question. If a business requires a person to work shift according to the Shop Act, then should the business have the authority to say they don't want the employee to have Saturdays off only? Or is that discrimination? Again, remember, it's a contract, and you have to go back to the basics of contract law. What are you contracting into? You will have the understanding of the shift system. How does the shift system work? Does the shift system require me to put in any 5 of 7 days? This question about having the Sabbath off, does my business work on Saturday? That's the first thing. Does my business work on Saturday? And if my business work on Saturdays, then it is just a discretion am I exercising to let you off on Saturdays, as opposed to a right that you have. Because it really can't be discriminatory if the business works on Saturdays. But by shifting, I am facilitating you. I am facilitating you to not to come in on Saturdays because you can come in on Sundays because the shift is involved, or maybe you can work Saturday nights, which is possible. But remember, I do not have to change my roster. I do not have to do anything to accommodate you. It is basically through the goodness of my heart. And once discretion is exercised, that discretion can be withheld or it can be exercised. It is up to the individual. It may be easy for those persons who have shift. And we know that sometimes there are understanding employers who would accommodate you. There are some who care not to accommodate you, but you can't regard it as discriminatory simply because they do not accommodate you, especially if the original terms and conditions of the employment contract was that my business work shift. I hope I've answered your question.
Question from Yvette.
Good evening to everyone. I want to say thank you to Mrs. Seale. The lecture has been extremely informative. I have a few questions. What I noted that you said, which was very interesting, is that, and I would have heard it similar sentiments before, that there are no absolute rights. I thought that was very interesting because, and then you said also the Constitution is the supreme law of Barbados. I realized that a lot of the things that we think about are yet in the future, because things like the Sunday law and our liberties being taken, those are things that are yet in the future, because right now we should be thankful for the liberties we enjoy. My question would be, though, you said that the town hall meetings are very important. My first question is, you said that the people give power to the Constitution. So when you have things that are passed as law, that's the first question I have to ask. Would people have a right before it gets to that point? Although we have persons who are elected to represent the people, would the people of Barbados, for things that are going to be passed as law, have any rights within the town hall to say, okay, well, we don't think or object to it, or they have the absolute right to make the laws and then inform us as to what the decisions are? That's the first question.
Not with the new constitution. The new constitution, the Constitution Review Commission has been going around the length from Barbados, trying to get input from all sectors of society. They don't have to, I must say, they don't have to accept your recommendations, but the persons were given an opportunity to make recommendations. And that is where you at least make an effort. It's just like voting. Some people say, well, you know me, I ain't into this worldly thing. I ain't voting. But if you don't vote, you're gonna upset the government that is in power and upset whatever the government does, because your non-voting is really voting, because your non-voting is putting whatever government in power because you don't. So if you don't want to make your presence heard, then you can't blame anybody. So although they're not compelled to accept recommendations, and you make your presence felt though at these town hall meetings or whatever, make a contribution, then at least it must be noted. And when it is noted, then you have an opportunity to advance it. Sometimes they might accept it. Sometimes they might not even be looking at it. Because the truth be told, I can see in a society like ours that, yes, we recognize the Adventists, we know of the Adventist religion, but by and large, we are a small minority. And I believe that when people think about certain things, they might not necessarily think about us. And if our presence is not felt, then you may be even inadvertently forgotten. It may not even be intentional. But if I plan something, exactly, even sometimes, I have grown up with I've gone to secular school. I've obviously gone to a secular university. I've gone to all of these places. And when the people plan something, sometimes they plan it on Friday nights. And I say, look, hey, well, if you want me, you can't plan it that night. And then they'll say, hey, yeah, Seale, oh, shoot. And some may try. Now, that is where they may go right ahead and say, well, there's no better day. So I said, all right, well, I'll catch y'all later. Or they might remember me because I have made my presence felt, and then I'm included. And then they accommodate me to shift to another day. So it may not be intentional all the time, but if you don't make your presence felt, people will forget you.
Yeah, it's true. As I was saying, a lot of the things that we think about are yet futuristic because we don't have any laws restricting us worshiping on the Sabbath, or anything of that nature. But we know in the future that there'll be laws passed. And you said that the Constitution is the supreme law. So when we actually say, okay, we're worshiping on the Sabbath because it's the law of God, based on the laws of the land, the constitutional day. Well, I should ask, if the law of the land is the constitutional day that has been adopted, is the Sunday that persons will worship, and based on our conviction that we should worship on the Sabbath, then we will be seen as breaking the law of the land, and we can be subjected to being arrested and prosecuted based on what you have said, if I'm understanding what you said correctly.
Well, look, only insofar as, look, that is why we're speaking about Section 19 of the Constitution that gave you that right for whatever religion you believe in and to propagate your gospel and all that. If that section is not adversely affected, and there's a section, maybe not Section 19, but a section that reads similar to that, then that is a section that protects us futuristically. It protects us in the future, because once the Constitution remains as the document that it does, that it has been, but that part, even in changes, still have something to that effect that protects your religious right. Then the issue of a law, let's say other than the Constitution, now let's say some other law comes up that prevents us from worshiping on Saturday, or declares Sunday the day of the week that you shall worship, then it will be in contravention of the Constitution. It will have to be struck down in the court, because it will be inconsistent with the Constitution, which gives me the right to adopt whatever religion I want to, or change whatever religion I want to. And then if you give a day, that would obviously be in conflict with the Constitution, unless the Constitution itself gives a day. And I see difficulty with that happening immediately. I mean, I don't know when it's going to happen, and there's nothing in the Bible that tells me when it's going to happen. So the question is, if the Bible says so, if the Bible says that, then you can believe it will happen. If the Bible doesn't say, well then, but as far as I'm concerned, it would have to be written in the Constitution as opposed to any other law, because once any other law makes it, it would then be inconsistent with my right under the Constitution to have to choose whatever religion I want, because every religion is not a Sunday religion.
So then suppose it is approached from the basis of, I think you have mentioned something about I don't remember the correct term, as it relates to the public, the good of the public harm. I might have used the wrong term for example.
How could religion be public interest? The public interest ain't got no religion. In fact, they got less people even interested in religion, whether it be Adventist, Catholic, Anglican. We have become a more secular world. So the public can't be one group. The public is the general public. And I can't see the general public caring about religion one way or the other. And that's my honest opinion. I don't see it. There are few sectors of society that are Christian, whether it be Anglican, whether it be Catholic or Wesleyan, holiness, whatever. But the world by and large, or society, I talk about Barbados, by and large, is a pluralistic society, and they're really religion in a major thing in their eyes. So I can't see that being successfully argued in any court that it was for public good. Because remember, if it's for public good, you gotta show me the public bad. What are the Adventists doing that is so bad and injurious to the public that would require them to worship on some other day?
Okay.
Your rights can be simply eroded. I mean, I don't want to appear as though I am a doubting Thomas, or I believe is impossible, because when something is supposed to be happening, or when God allows something, even if he doesn't cause it, but he allows it, you'll be surprised how it can happen. That's the truth. But generally speaking, as I understand the law and as I've practiced the law over the years, it can be a simple thing. I mean, when that does happen, you could really look up redemption drive nigh, because it isn't something that can happen easily. And if it is allowed to happen, that would be one of the greatest signals that tells you that it is even at the door. I mean, we know that Christ will return soon. There are no time limits, and it can happen anytime. But there are certain indicators that you could definitely jump up and say, well, boy, all shut down now. But I really can't see it as happening under a guise of public interest. It would have to be something that I didn't think of, but certainly not public interest. Because remember, the public good is about something that's injurious to the public, so you need it for the public good. And the Adventists, as far as I'm concerned, has never affected or offended the public. Some people may not want to hear us, but certainly we are not even like a peculiar religion that people is shut the door when they come around because they don't want them to annoy them, because they don't go to other people's church. We've not been like that. So we have our own peculiarity. Certainly, we do. People say we ain't eat pork, but when we ain't eat the pork, we ain't affect them. If we don't drink pork, we ain't trouble in the body, we just don't drink it. But we have never been looked at as such an annoying or something like that people don't want to shut the door. Either the woman, I hear you, they may not do this or that, but you would have to start to be a religion that really affecting the people, that you have to to do something about this religion for the public. So I can't see that succeeding. Not right now. Not the way. No, I certainly can't tell you what can happen in the future.
Yeah, okay, let me frame this scenario. For example, we would have just had the COVID pandemic, and based on the laws that were enacted, okay, in terms of freedom of movement, and that was for the public, but I don't know if I will use this loosely, the public good, because the government saw that they were thinking.
That was the public interest matter.
Right. For example, now there's the international discussion of climate change, and there's discussion as it relates to having a public holiday for the earth to rest. That's something that was discussed at a higher level. So adopting it from the things like the carbon footprint and things from that perspective, how from the international perspective, where you have the Sunday for family, Sunday for the public, the public good for climate change. That's something that's being put out there in the discussion. So I'm looking at it from that perspective, where that has been suggested, I think, on the international level, where you have a Sunday for climate change, or Sunday for the family, or Sunday for the public good, from that perspective of climate change and rest for the earth and things like that. So it might not necessarily be from that perspective, but all that's happening in terms of climate and destruction of the earth, the importance of having that Sunday for that, from that perspective.
Look,
that perspective.
I don't know. I am sorry. I do not plan to get hysteria over certain things that I've heard. Maybe yes. I think if you look hard enough, you can see whatever you want to see. That's the truth. And I know that Adventists, by and large, are expecting the Saturday law. So everything they're looking at, that everything that happens, they believe here is creeping in. Or I don't know. I am not. I expect certain things to happen, but I am more prepared to do my duty as a citizen. As I said, when I can make a contribution, make it. Yes, be ever vigilant, but sometimes I believe hysteria could kill you before the thing actually happens. If you look hard enough and you get frightened long enough, you could even die before the thing come into play, because we become so fearful of it. Oh, look, it happening now. I am not, sorry, a conspiracy theorist. That's not me. And you must forgive me if it offends anyone. I am usually very, very frank when I speak, and I speak honestly, as honest as I can. But I honestly don't believe that. I mean, look, this world was never, well, apart from initial stages where you talk about the Jews and Jerusalem, and when there was people who respected the Sabbath, but the world is in a position now that Sunday is the key day. So the question is, everything that will ordinarily be done will be done in the mind of this Sunday keeper. We don't have religious leaders. We don't have even not religious. We don't have political leaders that are really Adventists, so to speak. You might have a few Adventists in the house here or there, but worldwide, how many people are really Sabbath keepers? So everything goes by majority vote. So if you're voting for a day of rest, do you really feel that they can vote for Sabbath? I just don't believe it's going to happen. But the question is, if they're saying, all right, we're going to rest the world on Sunday, does it mean I can't do anything on Sabbath? With the world resting on Sunday, that means I will get 2 rest days then. I can rest on the Sabbath, and the official rest of the world is on Sunday. And if they say, well, they want the world rest, so nobody should do anything, then I can rest on that Sunday too. But I can't see, because remember, the Bible still wants us to keep the people law. And you still render unto Caesar the things that Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. But I don't know. As I said, I am no prophet. I'm just a normal human being like everybody else. But I don't propose to be looking for things where you can't see them. Although we must all be vigilant. But I think that's just like the vaccine. Everybody come up and had an opinion that the vaccine. Some people say we'll be dead in 2 years. People that take the vaccine. Some people have died for not taking it. Some people have died with a claim that, yeah, they could find a correlation between taking the vaccine and that. The medical practitioners have said no, but family members have said, yeah, she did very good till she take this thing. But the point is, half the world population ain't gone. We are still here. Those who have taken and those who have not taken are still around. And people, you see, I get frightened, as I said, for these, and in the age of technology and WhatsApps and all these sort of things, conspiracy theories abound. And we got to be careful as we relate to conspiracy theories. That's just how I see life. But I know that there are lawyers, and there are sufficient Adventist lawyers worldwide that I don't think they can remain silent in circumstances where something affects our religious right. I can't see it.
Okay, my last question is how much of an impact does international law have on local countries that have signed on to certain treaties and agreements?
Significant. If you're a signatory to it, it's just it is only the question about that is where you do not make it domestic law. But most persons have argued, even the courts the courts have interpreted it that you sign on, and even in circumstances where you have not made it your domestic law, but you are a signatory to certain international treaties and things of that nature, that you're bound by them. Because remember, as a Christian, you've gone and signed. Nobody didn't send you. You signed up to it. So you are bound by the duties and the obligations of the treaty. So international treaties, yes, do have a significant impact on countries, notwithstanding their independence and their sovereignty.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Good evening. Sorry, I just had a quick question. You would have mentioned earlier about the issues we might face as Adventists, specifically in instances where, for example, two homosexual individuals might want to have their wedding performed, or might want to have a cake baked or something like that. So my question would be, how exactly would that be handled, or what protections would the pastor, for example, if two men or two women came to him and asked them to perform their wedding, and of course that goes against our religious principles or beliefs as Adventists, how exactly would that be handled, and what protections he would have?
Well, my argument now, as it stands, as I said, I can only speak of the Constitution as it presently is. The draft of the newer Constitution was knocking about sometime, and I think they went back, and now because of the widespread consultation, they're now revisiting it to make in-depth changes into the Constitution. Now, I can't speak to the future because I don't know what the final document will be, but relying on the present Constitution, where you talk about the freedom of conscience at Section 19, I see this as very relevant. Now, in these first world countries, law to me is looked on somewhat different to us. And although we follow trends from first world countries, they got some real strange things. And I always remember, and I always use the hot cup of coffee. I think it was somebody bought it. I think it was from some fast food restaurant. So I don't want to call the name because I'm not sure. But it was a person who bought a coffee from a restaurant. I think through a drive-through, moved off, and it fell in the lap and scalded them, and they got significant sums of money. Now in Barbados, I can hardly see that happening. Because you've got to be a clown to buy hot coffee and not hold it properly, and wouldn't know it would fall on you. And in Barbados, when we go to court, we deal with issues of negligence, but we deal with duties owed, but we also look at contributory negligence, because wasn't it the way that you handle the coffee that caused it to fall in your lap? So even if a court had found that maybe the persons didn't put it in a good enough cup, or the person didn't do that, you might still lose a significant part of your claim through contributory negligence. But in the States, sometimes in some places like that, you see it work differently. So although there's the same law, sometimes we practice, there are nuances in these first world countries and the way they do things. But as far as Section 19 is concerned of our Constitution, once that is alive, nobody can make you do anything. Remember, it says, without, except with his own consent, no person shall be hindered in the enjoyment and his freedom of conscience. And for that purpose of this section, the said freedom include freedom of thought and of religion. So I've got, and you can't, without my own consent, you can't ask me to marry you to homosexuals. I will bring this section of the Constitution that protects my religious rights that says you can't do it, because strange enough, there are some people who don't mind marrying you. So you could go down the road to the next fellow who ain't care, that once you pay them sufficient money, they will marry you. But I won't. So it isn't even that an individual could claim he cannot get married because I won't do it. There are other choices that would allow him to be married. So even it may be a bit difficult if people said, I am not doing it. And if everybody said, I am not doing it. But even in Barbados, suppose all the churches, not Adventists, all the religious bodies in Barbados said, I will not marry you. That can stop the man from marrying. Because you could go to the magistrate, and the magistrate is not a religious marriage, but that is a marriage that is recognized nonetheless. That's called a civil marriage. But it is still a marriage with all the rights that accrue. Because people go before, you know how many people go down to the magistrate and marry? I've married quite a few myself when I acted. And that's not a religious ceremony. But they have all the rights, because some people just ain't got the time, some ain't even got the money, some want a quick fix. Some people get out for a ship in the morning, go and get certain documents, and they want to get married in Barbados, so they come before the magistrate and they can be married. So, you know, it doesn't prevent a person from marrying at all. So they can't even argue, I cannot get married because no religious leader wants to marry me. They will still be married. They'll still have a civil marriage. The still rights will accrue to them. Even if Barbados had turned to that position, they can still get married. So I can't see how I would be without a right to claim my religious protection under my freedom of conscience pursuant to Section 19 of the Constitution. I can't see how it would do, how someone would prevent me from establishing my right.
Thank you very, very much for that answer. I think that pretty much answers my question. I think our time is far spent. I think it was a very informative and educational lecture, and the information was very useful. I think it's important for us as Adventists, as Seventh-day Adventists rather, to be aware of not only our religious beliefs, but also our rights and, you know, our responsibilities as citizens of the country. And so I want to thank you this evening, Brother Seale, for taking the time to, you know, come and speak to us on this topic. And I'm hoping that sometime in the future, maybe we can expand on it a bit more and even discuss other topics. But again, I want to thank you. And I'm sure my other team members and those from Jackson will join me in thanking you as well. I want to thank those who would have joined us online. those on Zoom and those on YouTube as well, those who would have asked questions, those who would have commented. I also want to thank Sister Isla, who is from the education department. She would have assisted me in putting this program together, and also want to acknowledge the fact that you are related to Sister Isla and Brother Pearson. I would have forgotten to mention that earlier in my introduction. So as I said earlier, I want to thank you, and I'm praying and hoping that we would have all been blessed by this evening's proceedings. So at this time, if there's no other questions or queries or comments, we're going to turn over to Sister Kalia as she closes us off in prayer.
Hi, good night, everyone. Please bow your heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, as we come to you in prayer, we ask that you extend your blessings and graces onto everyone. Father, we thank the Brother Seale for doing his presentation, and we hope that everyone was able to learn something, Father, for Christ's sake. Amen.
Amen. Again, we want to thank those of you who would have joined us for doing so, and I pray that you have a wonderful week, and you as well, Brother Seale.
Thank you. Good night,
You're
all.
welcome. Good night.